I feel very honored that you have me and to speak to so many amazing women. So I'm going to just, I guess as the sort of the flyer said, I'm going to be speaking about Café Hillel and a terror attack that I survived in 2003. So it's 17 and a half years ago now. It's really a story really about pain, family, unity, love, and a lot of hashgacha pratis. You know, I think that we can always see Hashem's hand in every area of life, not just in the good things. And I think you'll see as the story goes just how Hashem just moved all the pieces exactly to how they were supposed to be. So it was 2003. It was in the midst of the second intifada in Israel. I can't really see most of you, so I don't know how many of you are aware of what was going on that many years ago in Israel. It was a time in the country where there were literally suicide bombs happening every day. People was on buses, in crowds, in restaurants. It was happening everywhere. How I ended up, I was in Israel. So for those who can't tell, I'm Australian. I sound similar, but a bit different to Joanne. I do get asked often if I'm South African, but I'm not. I'd gone to SEM for a few months. And I guess for my parents, I'd come from a very traditional but not religious background. And for my parents, even for me to go to SEM was like a big thing. I took a chunk out of my university degree. I think it was actually, must have been holidays. I don't even remember. I took a chunk of time out. No, I'd finished my degree. I don't know. I'd taken a chunk out, and I'd gone to Israel to learn in SEM for a few months. And because of the Intifada and the whole situation that was happening there, I had a deal with my parents. They sort of let me go in on one condition. They said to me that whenever there is a terror attack, wherever in the country, no matter what time it is in Australia, that I had to send them a text message just to tell them that I was okay. This was like the condition of me going. This was in the days, as much as my kids find it hard to believe, before WhatsApp, before iPhones, before anything. It was a real regular, normal text message, I'm okay. So here I was, a single 25-year-old girl, gone to Israel for a few months. I was living, for those of you who know the areas, I was living in Cowan. I was staying with a very good friend of mine from Australia who we'd studied university together, called Tova. And there was another friend with us called Cowan, who was also there. So she was there on a holiday, and she was with us as well. It was a regular Tuesday evening. We were just sitting in the apartment. I'll take a step back. I was learning in SEM. SEM had finished, so it must have been about 5 o'clock in the evening. And I walked back to Katamon with a South African, actually friend of mine. So my SEM was in Givat Shaul, which is probably about a 45-minute walk down to Katamon. And you sort of, on the walk, we went through Nachlaot area. So we went into, actually on the way through Nachlaot, there was just like a market sort of place there. So we decided, I think one of us needed fruit or vegetables or something. So we went into this little market. And when we walked in, we saw there was a television screen up there. And when we looked up there had been a terror attack actually in Tel Aviv that afternoon. I think it was in a bus stop. And so I can't actually remember the details, but there'd been a terror attack. So it was approximately by now about 6 o'clock Israel time, which must have been about 2 a.m. in Australia, in Melbourne. So having this thing with my parents, I straight away got out my phone and I sent them a message saying, there was an attack, I'm fine. This will all come into play a little bit later. So we made it back home. I went back to the house in Katamon and just with my friends. So we were then sitting around, and I don't know, one of us at a certain point said, why don't we go out? Let's go for a dinner, drink. I don't really remember what we were going for. Then we decided we were going to go to Café Hillel on Emek. We weren't too far from it. Now, because the three of us were Chutznikim and not Israelis, we didn't tend to have the Israeli radio on. And actually that night on the radio, they there was announcements saying that they knew that there was a terrorist loose somewhere in Jerusalem, and that they were warning people actually not to go out, that they knew that there was somebody out there. So we had no idea. So we started to leave, and one of my friends was quite the paranoid type. Looking back now, she probably saved our lives. So we went in a cab because we refused to get on buses. So we went into this cab, and we arrived at Café Hillel. And when we got there, the waiter at the front sort of was about to let us in. And my friend Tova, who again was the paranoid one, said, "We're sitting at the back." She's like, because if something happens, she actually, I think, even said the words, "If something happens, we'll be okay." So we went all the way to the back. And we sat in a very strange, actually, position. But the front door was here. And then we were all the way opposite the front door. And there was a couch against the back wall. And we sat, I mean, normally you go out for coffee, you sort of sit opposite each other. For some reason, we actually sat all three of us next to each other. So our backs were on the back wall, and literally directly opposite the front door. So like Tova was in the middle, I was on one side, and Sippy, and we were all literally just facing the front door with a table in front of us. At Café Hillel, how it worked there is that you ordered from the front. The waiter didn't come to you. So I think one of us actually went to the front, it was by the front door. We went to the front door, she put in the order, and then just went to sit back down. Maybe 10 minutes later, I don't know, the waiter, he was actually an Arab waiter. I think it was Druze actually, or whatever, but he came and brought us our food. And unfortunately, he died that night. So he came, brought us our food. And I'm not sure exactly at what point after the food came, but the bomb happens at about 11:20. The only way I can kind of describe it is it was like a human-sized fireball. Like it was just at the front door, it was a very loud noise. And I just remember feeling this like gust of heat almost just come to our faces. And then the cafe just went dead silent. The only way I can kind of describe it is one of my kids have a book about when Hashem created the world. And I think in the book, it speaks about how like the earth was silent, like the birds weren't chirping and the animals weren't, like nothing was making a noise. It's probably the closest thing I can recall. It was just this eerily silence. To be honest, I don't know how long that silence was for, whether it was for a few seconds, a few minutes, I don't know. And then after that was just like pandemonium. People were just like going everywhere, things were everywhere. Like I remember, it's funny actually from the three of us that we each remember different bits from the explosion. Like one of my friends could not handle being around a barbecue. I don't know how long, because it was the smell and the stench that she remembered. I think for me, it was more the loud explosion that kind of is what shook me. And for the other one, it was something else. But each of our senses, I think, just picked up on something different. So then the cafe, the whole side wall and front was all glass. So when the explosion went off, the entire wall just like shattered down, basically. So there was glass, like shards of glass all over the floor. The three of us just kind of looked at each other, and I guess you kind of just know what had happened without, yeah, it's just sort of this instinct of just, you knew what had happened. And we all just kind of grabbed each other. I remember going to grab my bag from the table in front of me and realizing like the table wasn't actually there anymore. So we all just kind of grabbed each other, and then we started running. Now, again, we say Hashem at this point, obviously had already saved us, but for some reason, instead of running out the front through the cafe, we actually went to the side because there was no wall anymore. It was all broken glass and it was an alleyway, and we just went through the side and went back. Now, speaking to survivors actually from afterwards who couldn't shut their eyes even at night, it was all because, I mean, Baruch Hashem, we were just saved from seeing bodies. We didn't see any of that part. Like it was, I don't know, we were guided the other direction as opposed to forward, where all the casualties and everything were. So we ran out the side through an alleyway in Emek Rephaim. And I mean, looking back, it was like, it's funny thinking, I'm a physio now, so I spend a lot of my time teaching people about the nervous systems and how your sympathetic nervous system is the one which is like the fight or fright kind of situation. And this was like, I've never had such a sympathetic response. Like my shoes, I was wearing slip-on shoes that fell off at some point. So I was literally walking on shards of glass when I got to, I mean, without one cut in my foot. Like I didn't have any scratches on my feet whatsoever. So we ran through these alleyways coming through, and we just kept screaming. There were people sort of on their balconies, and we called out, there was a pigua, there was a pigua, there was a pigua. And as if they didn't know, because they obviously did know, but, and this really lovely American couple, I still to this day don't really know who they were, but they saw us and they said, come in. So they took the three of us in. So my friend Sippy was bleeding from her back, and she literally just lay down and she's like, I'm not moving until the ambulance comes to me. My friend Tova was actually okay, and I had blood dripping down my legs, but I was feeling I was okay. So at a certain point, again, I'm not really sure timing, but we heard all the ambulances and everything come. So she said to me, this American lady, she said, are you feeling okay to walk to the ambulance? So I said, fine. So I remember we came out and she helped me to walk, and I got into one of the ambulances that was there. And I remember I was sitting in the front, and again, I kind of was like having stinging in my legs, and I was just had blood sort of coming all the way down my legs. And I just remember the ambulance driver, and I just kept saying, like, am I going to be okay? Am I going to be okay? And like showing him my legs and everything. Just the kindness, and he was just calm, and he just kept saying to me, it's all going to be okay. You're going to be okay, and you're going to be okay. So in the meantime, I didn't have a bag. I didn't have my phone. I didn't have anything. So I have an aunt and uncle who live in Harnoff, who I'm very close with. So I asked one of the other people in the ambulance, can I borrow your phone? I took their phone and I called my auntie, and I told her where I'd been and what happened. And she said, where are they taking you? So I asked him, and he said that they were taking me to Hadassah Har HaTzofim. Now, I don't know if, and many of you are aware, but in Israel, after these piguim, depending on how severe your injuries are, determines which hospital they take you to. So they take you to Hadassah Ein Kerem when it's really bad. Then I think it's Shaare Zedek, and then I think it's Har HaTzofim. So my auntie just kept saying on the phone, are you sure you're going to Har HaTzofim? Are you sure Har HaTzofim? So I said, yes. So she said, I'll meet you there. So I remember we were actually the first ambulance to arrive into Hadassah. And I remember pulling up in the ambulance, and there was this like, I guess it's how they do the training. You know, it's one of those things like in Israel, they just train for this. So they all just kind of, they're in their places and they just know what to do. And there must have been about 30 to 40 medical staff like waiting at the ambulance place. And they kind of just took us out, and someone put me in a wheelchair. They just whizzed us into the emergency room. I remember, so a doctor came in and a social worker pretty much at the same time. So the doctor, it's a bit scary when you're actually from the medical world and you kind of understand what they're looking for and why they're looking for things. But I was sitting cross-legged, and I'd had 2 pieces of shrapnel go inside me. So one of them went into my calf muscle, and one of them went into like the back of my thigh, basically. So he was feeling, you have a pulse that's in the bottom by your foot, and he was actually feeling for my pulse. And in my head, I was like, oh my gosh, if I don't have a pulse, that's it. Like they're literally gonna like amputate my legs. Like this is how my brain is like ticking. And I don't remember what my observations were, but like I know my heart was like racing and my oxygen, it was like, and so I'm just like watching all the screens, understanding what's happening to me, which is stressing me out even more. But anyway, so there was a pulse, Baruch Hashem. And by then, I think my auntie had also come. And I just remember this social worker asking sort of where I was from. And I said, I'm from Australia, whatever. She said, listen, you have to call your parents. So I said, I know. And she said, no, you have to call them. Like, not somebody else, like you have to actually call them. So in the meantime, I think there was no reception or anything in the emergency room. So, and they took me, I think they took me for an x-ray and then for a CAT scan. And this was all within the space of like 40 minutes. Like, it was very, which for anyone under NHS, like, you can't really compare what's going on. So they took me in for a CAT scan. And when I showed doctors this CAT scan, you can't really comprehend, but the piece running through your leg from your back, you've got your sciatic nerve and your sciatic artery and there's big vessels running through your leg. And when you look at the cross section of where this piece of shrapnel went, it literally dodged and missed every vessel along the way and lodged itself like next to my sciatic nerve. To the point that they actually said, that the medical staff, they said, we can't actually go in to get it. They said, it's actually too dangerous for us to go and touch it. They said, don't worry, your body just produces like a coating around it and it's safer just to stay there. So I was like, okay. But they said, but the one in your calf muscle, that one we're going to take out, but it's fine, it's not an emergency, we'll take that out tomorrow. So I said, okay. So they took me up and they admitted me to the ward. And in the meantime, my auntie who was there with me, she actually had to go out of the emergency room, and she called my dad to tell him what had happened and that I was okay and whatever. So the side point, right, so I'll take you back now to how all the bits make sense. So my auntie had told my dad. Now, I had told you I had this deal with my parents that I would message them if there was a suicide bombing. So when I sent that message at 6 o'clock Israel time, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, Australia time. Now, my mum had to take my grandfather for a medical appointment. So she woke up at about 7 o'clock in the morning, I don't know, 6 or 7 in the morning, turned her phone on and saw there was a bomb, I'm okay. She went to pick up my grandfather and then took him to this hospital appointment. My uncle is a doctor and works at the same hospital and happened to see them in the car park as they were coming in. So he'd heard about the bomb in Jerusalem already. And he said to my mum, there was a bomb in Jerusalem, is Rochelle okay? So my mum's like, yeah, I got a message from her, she's fine. So he's like, oh, okay, fine. So anyway, so they go in, my mum takes my grandfather to this appointment. In the meantime, whatever, an hour or two later, my auntie had called my dad. My dad then had to call my uncle. My uncle then called in my mum and my grandfather and had to break the news to them, at which point, I think I must have spoken to them at some point. I just remember being on the phone and speaking to my mum and my grandfather just so they could actually hear that I genuinely was okay. And then, so they moved me to a ward, and I have my aunt and uncle in Harnof, and they have 5 kids. One of them's a girl and the other 4 are boys. So the girl I'm very, very close with, she came actually to the hospital that night, and she slept in the room with me. And my auntie at a certain point, again, I'm not exactly sure when, but so one of the sons is best friends with someone called Hanan Sands, who I don't know if any of you have heard of, but he was meant to be marrying Nava Applebaum the next day. So my aunt and uncle were making 2 Sheva brachas that week for them, because they're very close with the parents. So at some point she said to me that they knew that they couldn't find the father of the bride and the bride. So they transferred me to the ward. My cousin came to me, and then at some point, again, I don't know exactly when, but I think it was in the morning, my auntie called me again somehow, and she just said, don't let Rivka, who's my cousin, turn on the news. because by that point they'd already heard what had happened. So she sort of had to come and break the news to her. So just as a side point, I don't know how many, again, this was quite a famous pigua because of this, that Dr. Applebaum and his daughter Nava were, Joanne, I can't look at you. So they were actually going out for coffee the night before the wedding. They had pulled up just outside the cafe, and what happened actually was that the terrorist got out of his car. He'd actually, they had on Emek Rafaim, they had a checkpoint because I said earlier, they had known that there was someone loose. Until 11 o'clock that night, they had a checkpoint on Emek checking every single car. Now, whether they knew this, the terrorists, I don't know, but they obviously at some point knew because the bomb happened after the checkpoint had moved. Someone dropped him out the front. The terrorist who did this was a cousin of the one who did it in Tel Aviv that same day. He got out of the car. Someone, I think it was the manager of the restaurant, saw him get out the car. He screamed to the security guard, Mechabel, which in Hebrew means terrorist or whatever. The security guard actually stopped him coming in, and that's when he exploded. So, and Nava and her father were still outside actually. They were by their car, and everyone who passed away was all by the front door, which is why when my friend Tova said to us, we're sitting at the back, literally kind of saved our lives in that sense. So Nava was due to get married the next day. And again, I've got a picture at the end, but if any of you have been to Café Rochelle, her dress that they've put in a thing there. I think they actually made part of it into a chuppah, and part of it they kept at Café Rochelle. So, okay, so that was that side of things. So then the next day, again, just to show how Hashem gives you everything that you need before it's even happened. My mum's first cousin, who is a general surgeon in Australia, happened to be in Israel over that time. And I was meant to be meeting him and his sister, so my other aunt and uncle, that morning for breakfast. So I had to somehow get through to them and tell them, actually, I'm in the hospital. So they came, and I guess, look, I was in a foreign country. As much as I knew that Israel was looking after me and they were doing the best things for me, it definitely helped having a familiar face and a doctor who checked over all my notes, and because again, as I said, they weren't operating on one of my things. But he said, no, they're doing all the right thing, and basically just sort of checked everything over. So I met with them. And then in the hospital, at some point, again, the nursing staff came in and they said, there's a ton of reporters that want to come and speak to you. You know, do you want them? And I was very lucky because my friends Sippy and Tova, who were they were actually in a different hospital. We sort of got separated. They didn't get asked. They actually, I think they were Bikur Cholim, and they just sent all the reporters into them. And anyways, so for me, they didn't do that. They actually asked my permission, and I said I didn't want to speak to anybody. So each reporter went past, and they literally just, as they went past, they were like, Refuah Shlema, and just like kept going. Like they were just the most respectful. It was just really, really lovely and heartening to kind of have that just feeling, I guess, of love and support from people. I even had a visitor, the Australian ambassador, came to visit me in hospital. One of my cousins, I mean, now he's actually the treasurer of Australia, but at the time he was at MP, and he found out pretty quickly. So somehow the Australian ambassador came to visit me in hospital, and I had my surgery, and they took out the shrapnel, just the one from my foot, my calf muscle. And yeah, and that was that. And Sippy, as I said, was in another hospital. So her shrapnel missed, as I said, her back was bleeding. It missed her spine, the doctor said, by about an inch. It missed her spinal cord, and it went through and it missed her stomach by about another inch. So they went in and they just took her shrapnel out and she was okay. And for me, I guess so the other one they left. So I made a Seudah Hoda'ah a few nights after. It was actually my Hebrew birthday. We made a Suda, and just really, the whole thing was just like the most miraculous thing. My mum, this happened on Tuesday night. So by Wednesday, my mum actually wanted to come, and I said, no, it's silly, don't come, I'm fine, and whatever. So anyway, she ended up coming the following week, I think, just to kind of check I was okay and actually generally alive. They were very good, my parents, and they let me stay on. Just, I think a lot of other parents would have just said, that's it, you're coming home. But they let me stay, and I think it was quite healing and comforting actually to stay, because we sort of got to go back to the Café, and it was almost like this sense of, I guess, recovery. I don't know, had I have left, if I ever would have even managed to get back to Israel at the same time. So a side point, I'll tell you a little, this is like the behind the scenes stories now, one of the nicest stories. So my husband and I had met actually in England a few months before this, and he was also in yeshiva at the same time. So we'd known each other, and we knew each other. Someone's not on mute. We knew each other, and for those of you who know where Chappelle's is, it's the yeshiva in Israel, and it is actually it's on Rehov, Beit HaKeren, but on oh my gosh, been there in a while. Can't actually remember the name of the street, but it's the main street that leads to Shaare Tzedek Hospital. And if any of you have ever been in Israel during a pikua, unfortunately, you know when there's been something happening, because you just hear siren after siren after siren after siren after siren, and you kind of get this pit in your stomach of like, oh gosh, like what's happened. So he was learning at Chappelle's, and only after we were engaged, actually, he told me that night he'd been sitting in his room or wherever he was, and he heard the sirens and the sirens and the sirens. So he knew there'd been a pikua. And he said he just had this feeling in his stomach that I'd been injured. He doesn't even know why he'd thought of me or how. He didn't know I was out. He didn't know where I was. He just knew somewhere in his stomach that he actually said he knew I was okay, but he knew that I'd been injured. And the following day, he received a message from a mutual friend of ours telling him that I had actually been injured, but I was okay. And then I've actually still he came to that Suda that I made, and it was he'd written me a card, which I still have. I've made a big sort of scrapbook of everything, and I do laugh. There's a card in there from him before we were even dating, which is quite funny. And a few months after that, I made a charity event for an organization called One Family. So when I was in the hospital, I have never in my life experienced such just unity and love of a people. I was getting delivered, I can't even tell you, like, firstly, Café Hillel delivered us, like, it was almost like their entire menu in a bag of like just food as like, just whatever, as a show of unity, I guess. I still have today, actually, I use it, a bag from the Cheshmel, the electrical company. Again, stuff with like just stuff and gifts and presents and whatever. And there's this organization called One Family. And they had come and, do I need anything and whatever. And they actually ended up giving, I don't know why we didn't actually need it, but they ended up paying for my mum to come that trip. And I felt like I wanted to give back to them. So I decided to put on an event. So myself and a couple of friends put on an event, and I needed music. So for those of you people who know, my husband does play music. So I called him and said, will you put on a band for this event? So he ended up putting on this band, a band that he played at this event. I think we raised about like 5,000 shekel or something, 10,000 shekel, I don't remember, for this organization, one family. So yeah, that's pretty much, I guess, the crux of the story. It's an incredible, I guess, humbling thing where I only also found out afterwards that when a miracle happens to you in a certain place.
Rochelle, do you want to just go back a tiny bit? I don't know if anybody else, but I was a little bit missing, but it could be mine, not yours.
Oh, did everyone else hear? Don't know. I think everyone else heard. What? Yeah, you're right. There's a bracha that you say that when Hashem, I guess, has performed a miracle for you at that place. And the bracha is she'asali nes b'makom hazeh, that Hashem has performed a miracle in this place, which, I mean, now it's actually not a cafe anymore. I think it's a shoe shop, but there is a plaque there for all the people that died. And we went back that week to the place, to the cafe, and we say that bracha, the three of us, every time we go back, which in some ways I feel like around the world, every step you take, you could actually say that bracha. We don't know where the miracles are going to come from, and sometimes we don't even know the miracles have happened to us. It just obviously so happens that here it was just such an obvious miracle, in sort of, like I was 2 meters away from a terror, from being in the center of a terror attack. And yeah, sort of looking back, when I look at the story, which is why I said to you at the beginning, it becomes like a puzzle piece where you kind of just realize why things have to happen at a certain time. And people sort of ask me, do I feel like I was in the wrong place at the wrong time? And I actually say I feel like I was in the right place at the right time. And that's how I think how we have to see all these things. There was a reason, obviously, for myself, for my friends to be there. And there was also a reason that we survived. That a couple of weeks maybe after, I was out with one of my cousins, and he picked up Hanan. So Hanan, instead of having a chuppah that day, ended up burying his bride. And I remember I got in the car and he was there, and he kind of looked at me and he's just like, oh my gosh, Rochelle, like, are you okay? And I just kind of looked at him, I'm like, me? Like, are you okay? Like I just couldn't actually fathom that he was even asking me that question. He's now Baruch Hashem married, kids. He's a very, very special boy. And I just really, through it, was just saw like this strength of Am Yisrael, and how Israel is just, you just feel part of a family, for the good, for the bad, for anyone who's been there for any extended period of time. Everyone is just there for you. And, from the American lady that let us in to all the way through to the hospital staff, I literally felt like their daughter. Like it was just this strength, this sense of just real family. And like, even though I didn't have my parents or have my immediate family there, it was really just this sense of like, you are ours, and like, you're gonna be okay. Like, don't worry, it's all gonna be okay. And it really was. Like, I guess I'll just finish with just speaking a little bit about the Mizrahi family. So Alon Mizrahi was the security guard on the night of the attack. He was a 22-year-old from, oh my gosh, just next to Meir Sharim. Can't actually remember the name of the place. Anyway, just Nikikar Shabbat. His parents are a very Sephardi family, just Nikikar Shabbat, they live. He was the second youngest. I think he just must have finished his army service, and he was just doing security for a job. And he literally stopped the terrorist coming into the cafe, saving I don't know how many people that night. So we went to the Shiva house, actually. I don't remember if it was the next day or a few days later. We went to the Shiva house, and being a Baal Tshuva, it was probably the first time I'd ever gone to like a frum Shiva house. So the three of us walked in. It was in this tiny apartment. They were actually sitting on the balcony. So we just went, there was tons and tons of people there. And we actually just went and we sat just on the side, just waiting for someone to come to us. So eventually one of the sisters came up to us and said, like, who are you? We clearly stood out like these three blonde chutzniks in like a Sephardi Shiva house. So she came up to us and said, you know, who are you? And we told her who we were. And she started like calling the whole family over. And they just kept saying, what did he say to you when he let you in? What, you know, how did he look and what did he say? And like, they just couldn't, it was question after question after question. We've all kept in touch with them. And they actually call us, because the three of us are Australian, and they call us like Alon's, Banot Shel Alon, I think they call us like Alon's girls, and Australian, like the Australian, like Alon's girls kind of thing. They are probably the epitome of, I think, just strength, really. They, 2 or 3 years ago, when things were also a bit hectic in Israel, one of their grandsons was also killed in a terror attack. He was in a petrol station. I don't know if any of you remember. It was maybe 3 or 4 years ago. It was in a petrol station, and a terrorist came and was stabbing and stabbed him. So, and how I found out about it is I was reading one of these newspaper articles, and his name was, I can't actually remember his name, but it had someone, Mizrahi, had just died. And I remember thinking, like, Mizrahi, that's like Smith, you know, in Israel. It couldn't be connected. And then I kept reading the newspaper article, and it said he was a nephew of Alon Mizrahi. So I ended up actually, this was at the same time, if any of you remember, that a girl's father was also killed, and then she had the wedding and she invited the whole country to her wedding. So this was all at the same time. So my husband very kindly said, Rochelle, just go to Israel. So I ended up going for a few days. So I arrived, went that night to the wedding, and then the next day, Tova and I we drove to the Shiva house. So this was now Alon's brother, Veer, who had just lost a son. So you can actually look it up, but he spoke at the funeral, and he just kept repeating the words, just Am Yisrael Achai. He said, you know, you've tried to defeat us, kill my brother, my son. He's like, nothing is going to stop us, and Am Yisrael Achai. And I just feel like, I guess we can all just learn so much from families like this, especially in Israel, who have given, just given everything, sacrificed so much, and they, yeah. So we're still in touch with them. And when we were in Israel 2 years ago, I took all of us, so myself and husband and kids, went to visit them, and so we went into the house. They've still got in the corner of the room, I don't want to say a shrine, but it's a table that's had a candle burning for 17 years. The father never ever lets the candle go out. He lights one to the next with a picture of Alon. And then at some point, the mum said to me, do you want to come up to Alon's room? And I said, okay. So we all go up, myself and husband and the kids, and we walk into this room. This was 2 years ago, and it was the room of a 22-year-old. The room was actually how he had left it that night. I'm talking deodorant, aftershave, like it was all left. They had his gun and like baton thing from that night with the shrapnel in it. it was like his bed was made. It was actually quite an eerie experience. But that was, I guess, their therapy, just keeping his memory alive. They really have gone on with their life. You know, they came to Australia. It was always his dream to come to Australia. So they, as a family, actually came to Australia. So they came to our house, and they had, the three of us were there, and all our parents were there, and they were there. It was like a really special experience. But I just think really that message of just, you know, nothing can defeat Israel, and just really showing that unity and the strength, and how, for me personally, just how Hashem really, as I said, you know, I don't feel I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, but the right place at the right time. But I feel that each and every one of us can, you know, experience that in a different way. Just for me, it was this sort of much more open miracle, I guess. So that is basically the story. If anyone does have any questions, please feel free to unmute yourselves and ask anything. Joanne, I don't know if you want to.
I mean, I just think that if anybody does want to ask anything, I just want to, you know, just first say that one of the most amazing things is when it doesn't matter where we are. And as you say, you know, you listen to the stories and you see the things, and there's some that Hashem says, this is your time. And then there are those that Hashem says, no, you're going to be carrying on and you're going to do it. And the amazing thing is how, as a Jewish nation, you know, what we've been through and how we get through things. And that's why I sometimes think to myself, you know, I mean, maybe Rochelle, you have a different sort of insight. I lived in Israel for 11 years. You know, I was there during the 81, the Lebanese war, and the wars after, and the Gulf War, and we were carrying our masks and our things. And it just is, it's kind of, but it doesn't matter where we are in the world. You know, we are really Am Echad Belev Echad, and we're one nation with one heart. But has your experience, even just for now, you know, getting through all this, you know, we read about the wars, and you look at, there was a beautiful clip going around, if you were born in the 1900s, what you went through. And here our kids are like, oh my gosh, you know, can you imagine if you didn't have Wi-Fi? Can you imagine? But, you know, where does the experience put you today, now, besides going through just, you know, obviously much more intense when you're reliving it and retelling it, which I just want to say thank you, because I can't imagine, I can't imagine how hard it is. But just going through this, like, what is your sort of focus, and is there something that you take from there that you just carry through with you? What is it?
It's an interesting question. I think it was only after this that I genuinely appreciated and probably started saying, when someone used to say to me, how are you? To really answer with a full heart, like Baruch Hashem, and to really feel that in a split second, like everything can change. You know, I was 25, I was single. I probably look at the world differently now than I, you know, had I experienced something like that now, maybe I would have looked at things differently. So a 25-year-old single girl. I think it's really just that, just recognizing that that Hashem has a plan for us. And I feel very, very blessed. I feel also in my profession, I feel very blessed to be able to help people. And to be living a fulfilling life. And, you know, I sometimes look at my kids and I realize, like, is this the reason that I'm survived, you know, for my kids, so that they could come into existence, and their kids and their kids. And it's a very humbling experience, I think, to know that you've actually been saved. You know, in as much as I think we all live it every day, because we're all saved every second of the day, but to tangibly feel that we're being, that I was saved, and to kind of, I guess, make my life a meaningful life. Do I think about that on a daily basis? No, probably not. But when I guess look back at the can't think of the word now, but the come on, Joanne, help me with the word.
Experience.
The experience. Yeah, I think that's probably what I take in. So I'll just answer, a few people are just asking questions. I don't know if everyone can see on the bottom, but someone just asked if I have trauma counseling and if I would ever send my kids to Israel. So my husband and I were actually married in Israel and lived for 8 years there. Actually, in that time, I also heard another 2 piguim while we were there. We were a street away from the Rav Kook shootings. We both heard, we were in our house, heard the shootings, and we were like, oh my gosh. And then we were right near, there was another one by the bus station. So we heard, I mean, we were in the houses, but we heard a lot. I definitely, I lived a normal life in Israel. I have to say I drove a car. For some buses always scared me, never went in the bus. And very, in a weird, again, this if there are psychologists on here, there might be a reason for this, but I've generally only felt safe actually going back almost to Emek Rafai. Whether that's because Hashem saved me there once, he'll do it again, or just, I don't know. But I lived a normal life there, and 3 of my kids were born there. I would love for them to go and live there one day, 100%. I really genuinely would. In terms of the counseling or therapy, so Israel offer as part of their service to anyone who's been in a terror attack, they offer therapy. I went once. I remember the lady actually said to me, she said to me, it's like a car accident. You have to remember, like, if you're in a car accident, that's just one time. And you have to remind yourself of the other thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of times that you've driven in a car and nothing's happened. And I didn't really feel I sort of got on with it. It's funny, I sometimes speak to my husband about it to wonder, have I actually like blocked the entire situation, or have I genuinely absorbed it and dealt with it? And the truth is, I don't know. I don't have nightmares. I don't feel that I don't feel that I'm blocking anything. And I don't know. I'm really happy to openly talk about it. I think, as I said in the story, because we didn't actually see any bodies, I did have some flesh actually, like in my hair and on my jumper and things, that I did have. But I think the not seeing bodies saved me from a tremendous amount of future trauma. The manager's sister, who was a waitress that evening, made contact with us and met with us, and she was at the front of the cafe when it all happened, and she saw all the bodies. She saw everything, and she said to us she could not shut her eyes at night for months, because every time she shut her eyes, that was the image she saw. And I genuinely feel like just by not being exposed and seeing all that really saved me from a lot of psychological trauma, actually. I forgot, I actually have a few pictures that if anyone wants to see, because people always ask me, like, what is the shrapnel? So let me just share this screen and see if I can. Oh, where to go now? Oh yeah, here we go. Hang on. Just tell me if you can see this. Let me go back to slide 1. Can you all see that?
Yeah. Okay,
so here on the left, this was a menu. A friend of mine helped me do this. This was we did the flame. That didn't happen on the night. Oh gosh. But that's the shrapnel. This is the piece of shrapnel that they took out of my leg. They basically stuffed their backpacks with nuts and bolts and just every other piece of metal that they can find. And that's what it was. It's a piece of, I don't know if you can actually see, but it's really just a piece of metal that they took out of my calf muscle. And here, this is my leg where they took it out of. That's my cousin, who's the surgeon, who would come that morning for coffee, and that's his sister. The next slide. This was on the front of The Age, which is the equivalent of, I don't know, what's the newspapers here, Joanne?
I don't know. So it says Melbourne woman survives Israel blast.
No, what's the newspaper in England that would be the Age?
Oh, you mean like the Daily
Telegraph.
The Telegraph.
Telegraph.
Yeah. So because we were 3 girls from Melbourne, we were like the front of all the Australian newspapers for a while.
I also think the Times Café.
Yeah, probably is the Times. So that was just one of the front pages of the newspapers. This was my friend Sippy. and Tova. This was the cafe. So that was the front door. We were sitting right at the back, and there, that whole side was glass. So that, and there's the alleyway. So that's why when the whole thing shattered, that's where we ran out the back. This is the security guard on the left, Alon Mizrahi. This was just a picture of him. And this is a picture from 2 years ago when we were in Israel. This is his mum and his dad, and that's his younger brother and the younger brother's kids. And this is me and my kids. We went to visit them. Just more newspapers. Here, this is Dr. Applebaum and his daughter Nava. And that's in Café Rochelle. If any of you have ever been, that's what they made the wedding dress into. So this is, yeah, that's just within the cafe after. And that's the car, that's the Applebaum's car. So they had literally just gotten out the front of the car, and the security guy stopped him coming in here. That was there. This was us. We went back to visit afterwards, and this was the manager's sister. She was the one who was extremely traumatized after. I think she actually became from, she sort of kept in touch with us for a bit. And that's just what it looked like at the end. Just everyone was sort of coming and lighting candles. And that was the memorial that it was. And that's it, really. Unless, I don't know if anyone has any more questions, or if I didn't answer anything. Well, someone just said, did I go into physio because of my experience? No, I'd already graduated 4 years before that as a physio. So yeah, so no, I hadn't actually, it wasn't because of that I went into physio. Joanne's gone. 1 second. Okay, you ready?
Okay, anybody else, or that's?
Oh, someone said, did I get my bag back? Yeah, I actually did. The police somehow managed to find me, and I did get my bag back, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I actually was thinking that, you know, when Rochelle kind of said, you know, we really don't recognize every miracle that happens when it doesn't come out like a miracle. And I do think about it sometimes when you know, when you look at things in our world and we realize that every little thing that we have is really, we're just blessed. And the challenges that we have to go through hopefully will make us into better people, and hopefully make us more aware of the gifts that we're given from above, and to also make us just more aware of people around us, you know, because nobody knows what anybody's been through, and nobody knows how anybody's trauma or anything affects anybody, even when it's not trauma. We wake up in the morning, it was a bad day, you know. And I think that if we look at other people daily with a different level of sensitivity, and, you know, somebody else is in a bad mood, you don't know why. We don't know why these things happen. And I think that when we can learn from these things, and we can really, really look and think, well, how can I be a little bit more sensitive to somebody else? So just once again, thank you. Thank you for sharing with us. Mirz Hashem, that all that you have shared and given should really just be, should be a zechus of an aliyah hanashamas of all those who didn't walk out. And I certainly know that when I go to Café Rochelle, I can't leave Café Rochelle without going and standing by Nava's dress and just saying, Hashem, you know, this is part of this is what it is. And if we don't make sure to do more in our lives, to make sure that every person who has gone through and lost their lives like this, then it hasn't filled the purpose of what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to. And I think that's something now we've all got to be aware of what's happening, where COVID comes from, where all the different things are, and just know that it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it's Hashem. It's God taking us, leading us, and saying, just be here and follow, and that's our blessing.